everybody. Welcome to the High Quality Fun podcast. Today I have Brian on with me. Brian, is actually Chris's cousin, who was the guy who talked about marathon running. If you've been listening to our show, we actually had the chance to cross paths at Chris's wedding last summer. I don't know if you remember me at all. I remember your face, but that might be about it. Yeah. How are we doing today, Brian?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about this. We've been setting up a little bit beforehand, and it seems like we have a lot in common with this topic.
Yeah, so Chris kind of insisted that I talk to Brian because he did this longboarding backpacking venture. I think he went from North Carolina down to Florida.
Yep.
And if you were to do the full trail, it sounds like you could actually go on paved trails all the way from Maine to Key West, Florida.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And I have a decent longboarding pass, so I'm hoping that we can just kind of riff on this and go back and forth on some of our tales and, laugh at the experiences. So to start off, how'd you get into longboarding and yeah, you can give us that background.
Sure. I had like a cheap street skateboard in, middle school that was more for like posing with and getting around, but like I wasn't one of the guys who could ollie or kickflip or anything. It was just it was an accessory more than anything, but it was something that was always kind of like in the back of my mind, part of personality. And then when I got to college, I went to college in Southern California, and like over half the people would get between dorms and classes and everything on their longboards. So I bought one, and that's become like my favorite thing, like over bikes, over just walking, over cars. If the distance is manageable enough, I like longboarding around.
Where are you living right now, and are you still riding?
I'm in West Palm Beach, Florida, and every once in a while, there's a lot that I like about Florida, but longboard specific, there's a lot of paved ground, and it's all flat, so it's very easy.
Yeah, I'm in Michigan, and those boards are just in the basement collecting dust. But I think at one point I had 4 of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at my peak, I had 3 at the same time. Like they're all different. You can use one. It's like people have like their 2-seater sports car for the weekend. You can have your little like hot rod board.
Yeah, I guess for me, how did I get into it? I had a buddy who rode in high school, and we ended up just finding this little neighborhood in Michigan, and there's no mountains or anything. So we found this neighborhood that had some hills and decided to just play around in there, ride down the hill, walk up, ride down the hill, walk up. And, eventually we saw these sliding videos, ended up making some homemade slide gloves with cutting boards and hot glue and everything.
Nice.
And we kind of took that into college. And I went up to Michigan Tech, which they have a decent amount of hills up there, still not mountainous. But went up there, and yeah, same deal, rode between classes and everything, and that was just the best way to get around. Except for in the winter. When it was in the winter, it was just like, nope, I guess we're gonna retire this thing.
Yeah, learning to, or like getting really into longboarding outside of LA, it's like I learned how to do it in flip-flops and foot brake with flip-flops, and that definitely, I've torn up my feet. Like, the front edge catches, and now you're like foot braking with your actual foot.
Your toenails.
Yeah, it's the worst.
Did you do was it just for commuting, or did you do downhill and slides and stuff like that?
It was mostly for commuting, but I went to Pomona College out in Claremont, which is at the foot of Mount Baldy. I think it's like the San Gabriel range. And so there were these groups of people who, like, someone would have a car, you'd all pile in the car, and they'd drive like a reasonable amount of the way up Mount Baldy, and then everyone would just get on their boards and go downhill on the switchbacks. And you could, and one of the roads would like literally go back into the campus. So if like the traffic lights were in your favor, you could just cruise the whole way down. But we weren't as industrial about making slide gloves or buying slide gloves or anything. And it was more just to like control your speed, get into a controlled slide, and then keep going.
Oh, you did it without gloves?
Yeah. And one time without a helmet too, which was just dumb.
I know for a while I was trying to learn those standing slides where you literally can like whip your board sideways and perpendicular with the direction you're traveling, slide, and then move it back to you.
Yeah.
And that is that what you were talking about? You were able to do that?
Yeah, like I guess it's like a snowboarding, right?
Right,
Like
right.
yeah, you do the same thing and then like you kind of absorb all your forward momentum as the pavement like eats up your urethane, and then you can keep going.
That's really cool. Before we get into the main thing, I want to share a few stories with you.
Yeah.
Just because I haven't had a chance to talk longboarding in a long time. I've actually broken 3 bones longboarding, and I have this gnarly scar on my wrist because I broke this wrist and this collarbone, my left wrist and my left collarbone. One of them was in college. I was actually commuting to work, which was it was the front desk, one of the dorms. And I was coming down this hill, and where my board was going is not where I was looking. I was looking a little bit forward of where my board was going, and there was a point where the concrete rose where I was riding, and pretty much hit that, flew through the air, landed on my wrist, just heard a like crack. And thank God my endorphins kicked in right away, because I was like holding my arm and looked down. It's like, yeah, that's broken. And there's just like a few people in this little courtyard staring at me. And I just started kind of barking orders because I just felt no pain because the endorphins were just like flowing through me. Hey, man, can you call the ambulance? Just like mouth drops, calls the ambulance. Hey, man, can you go tell the front desk I'm not going to be at work today? And then I saw this girl that I worked with, and she was just staring in awe. I was like, hey, Mia, can you take my stuff to my dorm? Here's my key. Yeah, of course, Tyler. And then I just sat there because I didn't have a car in college. I didn't have anything. My parents were 10 hours away. I ended up calling my dad and telling him what happened. And yeah, that was gnarly. And then I was just in a cast for the rest of the good warm days of college, which totally blew. Yeah, it did. Thankfully, it was my left arm. And then the collarbone one, that was just me trying to tuck and roll. And I think I landed on the face. It was all in soft grass too, but it was on the face of the shoulder instead of the back. And that was just enough to pop my shoulder or pop my collarbone. So yeah, I got plates and screws in the wrist now. So that'll live with me forever.
Did you ever set off the metal detector at DSA?
I thought I would, and I was all excited the first time I went, and yeah, it did not happen.
Yeah. I know. Completely unrelated to longboarding, I have a couple of screws in my left shoulder because I used to dislocate a bunch. And the first time I went through one of those, like the pod thing that rotates around you, and you have to stand like you're at a prison lineup. If you get out quick enough, you can see the readout of a human form on the little monitor. And one time it had like an area of concern around here, but they were like, it's nothing. That's the closest I've gotten to sending something off.
It's nothing. We'll
pat
his shoulder down. He's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just see if mine shows up next time. Yeah, so that's cool. And then I guess the last part is when I was in high school or the early years of college, I'd always come back and just practice sliding and whatever. So a lot of fun longboarding. Again, don't do it a whole lot anymore, but I don't know. I miss it. We live on a dirt road now, so there's nowhere to ride.
Yeah. You need that flat pavement.
Yeah. So yeah, let's just dive right into your backpacking adventure. Why don't you kind of tell us how you found out about doing this? And yeah.
So after I graduated college, I stayed in California and worked in Silicon Valley for a while, for 4 years, and then burnt out pretty bad and decided to like completely start over. And I ended up moving to the triangle of North Carolina, like Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and like totally like uprooted my life, quit my job, moved across the country, everything with really nothing to start from. And so I got a Craigslist roommate, and it turned out that he worked for the town of Carborough in North Carolina and was involved with transportation, and his passion was like bike lanes, public transit, all the good stuff. And one day, pretty early on into me living in his apartment, he was talking about this East Coast Greenway. That's a network of bike trails, optimistically to link the northern tip of Maine to the southernmost point in Key West. And so their goal is to like, you should never have to share the road with a car. You should be able to do the entire East Coast of the United States by bike or walking or rollerblading or skateboarding, longboarding, however. And this was 2014, and he's like, we just hit 30% in theory. Like, I'm really happy about that. But that was really all it took. I started looking it up because, you know, we lived, I think, 15 miles from where the network crisscrossed one of the roads. And so it's like, yeah, I could just hop on this. And me and Chris's grandpa retired and lived in Jupiter, Florida, which was also right on the path, the section of the path that was going through that area. I was like, so I could really just like get someone to drop me off at this trailhead and theoretically ride my longboard from where I live now to where my grandpa lives in Florida. And it should like theoretically be safe and chill and fun and cool. And so that's where the whole thing started.
That's nuts. I've heard of people doing, you know, cross country and stuff on a longboard, and that's why I was so excited to get you on.
Yeah.
Had you done any backpacking and stuff before this, or any long trips on a longboard, or was it all just day stuff?
All just day stuff. In my senior year of high school, I did like a 4-day hiking trip in the mountains in West Virginia, like not Appalachian Trail stuff, but like a baby version of that. And that was before this. That was the only like backpacking experience I really had.
So you at least had the gear, but you still had no idea what you were doing.
Pretty much, yep.
How long did it take you to do this? How many miles was it too?
Okay, so when I was planning, I budgeted, or I set a goal for 40 miles a day, and then some days were more. Many days ended up being less, and with a couple rest days, I think it took me a little under a month to get from Durham, North Carolina, to Jupiter, Florida.
Okay, that's not terrible. Do you know how many miles that was?
I think it's somewhere around 950 for that chunk.
And so you only did about half of it. If you were to do the whole thing, it would be closer to 2,000.
Yeah.
Okay. How were you working at the time? Did you take time off, or how did you actually have the time to do this?
Yeah, at the time I was a product manager at a really small tech startup, like iPad app startup in Chapel Hill. And it was kind of a lull in the business anyway. They were kind of reevaluating their business plan, their monetization strategy. And so I asked for a month sabbatical, and it ended up being like exactly the amount of time I needed. They were very nice to let me do that.
That's awesome. I'm actually a product manager in my company right now. So maybe after this call, we can go back and forth, and you can coach me up, because I kind of tripped into this role, and I don't necessarily think I should be in it.
For me, it was just like, can you translate from engineer to marketer, pretty much back and forth?
Yeah. I mean, I was doing that with Ford, with designers, like CAD designers and the upper management. So I'm really thankful I'm in this position, but it's just bizarre that I was able to land in it when I know there's a lot more qualified people out there. But that's for some offline talk.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. You were able to take a sabbatical. Can you, I don't know, tell us how it started? How did you plan out your stops, or is this all in the woods too? Because if it's all paved, I would have to imagine that there's not a lot of backpack or camping spots.
Yeah, I mean, it'll kind of all like bleed into the overall story of how it went. So there's a small nonprofit that's coordinating the linking of all these bike trails, but it's not like one uniform thing. It's basically a network that's locating, identifying, and encouraging the creation and maintenance of bike trails all throughout the eastern US. And then where there are stretches that don't have off-road, they find like the safest side streets to link these trails together. And they're called the East Coast Greenway, and they were based in Durham, so it was like I could go and see them at the headquarters, talk to them, and they have like great mapping tools on their website too, so you can get an idea of like where you're going to be on a protected trail, where you're going to be on the shoulder of a road, where you're going to be on a sidewalk. And so it was pretty easy to see their designated route and then, like chunk it out into roughly 40-mile chunks. And, like plan my days. I think some of them are like recreational city or county trails, because there were, at least in central North Carolina, there was a lot of like back and forth. It was definitely not a direct route by any means, but in order to stay off the roads, you'd like go south and then double back north and go through like this wooded area at the east side of the RDU airport. So there's some of those like recreational trails. There's some that are those converted rails to trails where they don't use the train line anymore, so they just pave over where the tracks used to be. And so sometimes that can be like parallel to a major road. Sometimes there are these frontage streets that are like literal paved roads next to major highways, which can be a little nerve-wracking.
With no barrier or anything?
With like, maybe just like distance or like a little grassy culvert between it. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And then for the majority of South Carolina, it was just the shoulder of State Highway 17, like 60-mile-an-hour traffic, 3 feet to your left, like ridiculous.
Man.
Yeah. South Carolina needs to update their infrastructure for sure.
They're probably working on it. The Greenway is going to poke them to get it done.
Yeah.
So you pretty much banked on 40 miles a day, and then did you find campgrounds? Did you have to go out of your way for those, or was there kind of rustic campsites you could do off the side of the trail?
Yeah, my first strategy was is it COA or KOA, that they have like facilities pretty spaced out all over the country. In a pinch, I only needed to do this once, but I read lots of people's strategy is like just go to a church, especially in the South. Like here in the Carolinas and Georgia, there are a lot of churches, and they probably won't turn you away if you're like, I'll stay out of your way. I'm just gonna pitch a tent here on your lawn. I'll be gone in the morning. I only had to do that once, but I've read people's travel logs of like, I just did that the entire way.
Oh, that's funny. I know that's the same for like camping with RVs and stuff. You can stay at Cracker Barrels, Walmarts. It's just like really weird places you can stay. And we went pop-up camping with our kids and actually driving to Chris's wedding. And we drove from Michigan down to Colorado, and we stayed in the back of a Cracker Barrel one time. And then the rest of the times it was us popping up our camper in like a truck stop, which was weird because you see a camper there, without with all hard walls, and you're like, they might be sleeping in there or a van or something. But then you see a pop up and it's all inflated and everything. It's like they're clearly staying there.
Yeah.
But worked out really well. And you're probably crossing through a lot of towns and stuff too, so it was pretty easy to stop and resupply and whatever. Yeah.
So on my first day, I felt really bad. I was at the Museum of Art, the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, and they have a trail that goes through like a bunch of outdoor sculptures. And so I guess the Greenway Foundation made this part of the overall thing. And then at the eastern border of it, it kind of goes back into a wooded paved trail. And so I was on the downhill, and at the end of the downhill, there was a right turn, and some dude on a bike came at the turn and then just like turned and came at me. And this was the first day. So like kind of like you were saying, like my endorphins were high, my adrenaline was high. I thought I was unstoppable. This is like hour 3 of the first day, and I was feeling great. And so I was like, I'm just gonna take everything really fast. I feel like I'm not tired, I'm full of energy. And so it was like not in my mind to slow down, to slide or foot brake or anything. And so my instinct when this guy like came at me out of nowhere was just to bail. And I ended up bailing head first And like, I was wearing a helmet, it's probably saved my life, but I just bailed head first and into the paved pathway, and it sucked. Like I felt something crunch. I like, saw stars and everything. And so that first night I went to an urgent care and then got a hotel because my neck hurt so bad.
Man, that's a humbling start to your trip.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, humbling is a perfect word because it taught me a little humility and like be more cautious. And so actually for like the first week I stayed in hotels because I wanted a real bed and not like a manually inflated thermarest thing. But
That's
then
fantastic.
yeah.
Did you I assume eventually you stopped living so bougie and
Right.
found some campgrounds and stuff like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did you do any training for this?
A little bit. I tried to get ambidextrous. And that was like,
about that.
yeah. But once I got into like, especially South Carolina, where like all my energy was like you were talking earlier, like you're trained on like 3 feet in front of you for raised pavement or like little cracks or little potholes or like acorns that drop down. And then so I was like, all my energy was like looking 3 feet in front of me and listening for anything coming up behind me. And I settled into just the muscle memory of my dominant goofy stance. And then for like the rest of the way, I wasn't switching. I was just like same motor skill, motor muscle memory. So all my training was for nothing, I guess is what I'm saying.
Were you able to maintain that? Obviously, you've completed it, but
Yeah.
I have to imagine you were, your calf was blown out on one foot and your hamstring on the other.
Yeah, it was more the hamstring than the calf. Yeah, definitely imbalanced.
Okay. I'll use this as a stepping off to tell you about the longboard marathon I did. I mentioned this on the Chris episode, but since we're talking about longboarding, maybe I'll go a little long on it.
Mhm.
I was training for a marathon in high school, and I was longboarding at the time. So the people that said they were going to sign up for the marathon with me, they never did. And I got to the day where I'm running my half marathon as a part of the training. And I just said, screw this. No one signed up to run it with me. I haven't signed up yet because I was waiting for my, friends to do it. And I just said, I'm done, whatever. And I found out I was on Reddit and I would just scroll all these longboarding posts, read the new gear coming out. I was really into loaded longboards and like Otang tires or wheels.
Yeah.
And so I just like reading these forums nonstop. I think it was in a Michigan one. And I found out that on the west side of the state, Grand Rapids area, there was a longboard marathon. I was like, I've been longboarding and I've been training for a marathon. Like, I can do this. This sounds awesome. And so my wife and I weren't dating, but we were friends, and we went with, I think, two or one of our other friends out there. We drove my piece of crap Grand Prix, didn't have air conditioning all the way out. I'm trying to remember who we stayed with, but they like went and played and did everything while I was riding the marathon, and they just like checked in randomly. But yeah, 26.2 miles of pushing. It's called a push marathon. Mm-hmm. And there's points where you're literally just like hiking this thing up a hill, and then points where you're bombing down hills. And same deal. I tried to get ambidextrous with my feet, front foot back, or what is it? There's 4 pushes, right? Left foot forward, right foot push, left foot backwards, right foot push. Yeah. The same with the other side. And I did all right, but eventually it was just like too much focus, too slow.
Yeah, so I just gave in. About it.
Yeah, you're clumsy, you're like falling off when you just want to ride. And I finished the race and it was awesome, but then I just like had the goofiest limp for the next hour. Just hamstring blown out on one foot, calf on the other. I think we were staying at someone's apartment, so we left after that, but they did like a downhill jam, I think is what they call it. So afterwards, everybody would line up at the top of the hill, go do their coolest slide. They might have had a jump and stuff like that. But I think I missed the majority of that. Regardless, it was very cool. Yeah, and I haven't really heard of anybody doing push marathons before, so that's kind of a story I tell pretty often.
Yeah, I'd only heard of one thing like that, and it's not a distant, like a set 26.2 distance, but there's a group somewhere slightly south of Miami, like actually near the gateway to the Keys, where they have a loop racetrack, like car racetrack, and I think it might just be 24 hours, or it's a time period, and it's just like push around this course for however long this race lasts, and whoever does like the most laps goes the most distance wins. But it's all push, like you were saying, and it's just nuts.
Man, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Then you're riding at night too.
Yeah.
Have you ever done pump racing where you kind of carve so heavy that you can actually pilot yourself forward without kicking?
I have not. At some points during my trip, or just like every day, I'll try and get like a little bit of extra distance or extra momentum by pumping, but I don't have like specialized pump trucks or anything. It's just using the hips and the momentum.
Gotcha. Yeah. So tell me more about the trip. How was day one? Was rough. Did you kind of get your swing of it? And was there any good stories worth telling as you went along this journey? Also, what time frame were you doing this? What was the weather like?
October. So it was honestly it was perfect because it was like fall in North Carolina, so like a little brisk, but I was going south, so the weather just kind of stayed constant. Like the later in the month I was still traveling south, so it just like got warmer by going south. I saw a couple through bikers, and the experience was always the same. Like they would catch up to me because they're going faster than I am, and they can see that I have a big old backpack with like my tent strapped to the back, and I can see that they have their panniers that are all loaded up, and like they've got their gear hanging all over their bike. And so we're like, oh, we're doing the East Coast Greenway. And like, where did you start? I started in North Carolina. Where'd you start? Maine. How long have you been going? Like, oh, me a couple of weeks. And they're like, yeah, a couple of days. And then it's just like we talk for a little bit at the same pace, and then they just like resume their pace and shoot off ahead of me. And like 4 or 5 times that happened. It was almost like literally that same script every time. And they're like, yeah, I've never seen a skateboarder before.
You probably were one of the few people to do that.
Yeah.
Did you run into any other longboarders?
No, not a single one. It was all bikes.
That's surprising.
Yeah. In I forget where it was called. It was a city that started with a G in South Carolina. It like unexpectedly started raining. Like I'm sure whenever you're going out for marathon training or anything, you're like impulsively checking the weather, like you just constantly. And so nothing on the weather app said it was going to rain, and then it just started raining out of nowhere. So the first thing that I could seek shelter in was like a bait shop, like just selling worms on the side of the road, like a little shack. And it was these 2 good old Southern boys. And like, so I'm soaking wet. I've got a big old helmet on and a big old dumb backpack and a longboard. And they are like, it was like I was an alien. They had no idea what to think. And then I said like, oh, well, do you get a lot of bikers? And they're like, yeah, coming past here. No one ever comes in. And I was like, do you mind if I just wait until the rain stops? And yeah, they didn't care, but they were like, who are you? Why are you doing this?
Did you have any other weather events that were worth mentioning?
Actually, the rest of that day, like it never really fully let up, and it sucks longboarding in the rain. Like you're worried about your bearings getting messed up and like all your hardware. And so less than like 20 miles after that bait shop, it was on Highway 17. And so a dude in like a really old red hatchback pulled over ahead of me and like put on his flashers. And since I'm in the shoulder, I basically like came up right behind him, and he rolled his window down. I was like, get in. And I'm like, no. And he's like, get in. You look miserable. And I was like, I don't know you. He's like, I'm just going to drive you to like the end of the stretch. I think the next major town was Charleston, South Carolina. And I was like, yeah, fine. It is pretty miserable. And then he was just a dude who like lives out of his car. All of his stuff was in the back and he just drives around. And he said his home base was New Orleans because he does like pop and lock dances in whatever, the French Quarter, and just like lives off of tips that people throw in his hat. And he was like on his way back down to New Orleans from wherever he was coming from up north. And he's like, I recognize like someone who's living off of his back. I'm living off of my back. And so he drove me to Charleston, and I didn't count however long he drove me. I like made sure when I was doing my check at the end of the day, it's like, I don't get credit for that stretch of highway that he drove me.
Oh my God, that's funny. How long were you with him? I bet he had some, I mean, clearly had some good stories.
Yeah, he had some really good stories. It was just a couple miles, but it was like a desolate stretch of Highway 17. So in the end, I think he did me a solid.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and for people who don't know, riding in the rain on a longboard totally blows because I remember getting my first board and being so, can't ride in the rain. I'll hurt the bearings, the trucks, and then after you beat it up a little bit, you're just like, I don't give a crap.
Yeah.
And then you make a little bit of money. You're like, bearings are dirt cheap, whatever. Yeah. But the thing with longboarding is those wheels just wick water right onto your feet. So you could be riding for 30 seconds and your shoes are totally soaked. I don't know if you had hiking boots or anything that were waterproof, but every time I rode in the rain, my socks were soaked.
Yeah. That's a good point. I don't know if you said you might want to talk about gear, and you've talked about like I had the same Otang wheels, but for footwear, I read about this guy who has the Guinness World Record for longboard distance. I can send you his link because I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but I was reading his website when I was doing all my planning, and he said the best thing to do for distance longboarding are those clean sandals with like the protected toe box. They're like really heavy duty sandals. And he's like, no socks, just heavy duty sandals with a really thick sole and a fully protected toe. And that's what's going to get you through it. And he was right. Like no blisters, well, like minimal blisters, but never had to deal with soggy socks or like blown out shoe soles. So I can co-sign his recommendation. Get those clean sandals.
Then you didn't have to worry about carrying socks or anything. Yep. You probably had some cold toes some days, but that was about it.
Yeah, and just the weirdest tan line.
Another thing is when those wheels get wet, those boards are so slippery. A normal turn, just a normal lean can lead to just a total slide out because you get any water on them and they slide like crazy.
Yep.
If you're practicing slides, it is very fun to ride in the rain.
For sure.
But it is scary.
Yeah.
That's funny. Did you get the guy's Instagram account so I can see his pop locking dropping videos? Oh
my God. No, I should have at the time. I'm gonna go through my notes. I think I at least have his first name somewhere so I can see if you Google like so and so New Orleans pop and lock. Maybe something will come up.
That would be amazing. Send him this episode. Like, hey, yes. Remember me?
Yeah, you gave me a ride. You saved my life.
You cost me miles.
Yeah.
So this was in, you said North Carolina was where that road was? 17?
South Carolina. I think it probably runs the whole length of the way, but South Carolina, for whatever reason, did not have as many designated off-road trails.
Okay. So you keep going.
Mm-hmm.
How many days are you in at this point?
I don't know, maybe 2 weeks in, probably halfway, maybe a little over halfway. And then, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But I remember when I got to Georgia, and it was literally like South Carolina didn't even pave the roads, and they're just like at the state line, it's just like fresh, smooth asphalt, a really, really wide shoulder on the road until I could get to a designated trail, and it was like a breath of fresh air, just like actual nice road conditions. It's funny the things that like 3 weeks into this, when you're in the mindset of just like look 3 feet in front of you, listen for stuff behind you. All you think about all day is like cracks in the sidewalk and how nice the sidewalk is.
Yeah, there's a notable difference between that smooth asphalt and just anything with like a little grit. Your
Yeah.
feet go numb and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then when I got to Florida, I think going from like the northern border of Florida to Jupiter was a solid week on its own, but it was that was the best. Like it took maybe not even a full day's worth to get from like slightly inland out to north of Jacksonville, and then the rest of the way it's just like on trails or sidewalks or like little used roads that are like right on the ocean. It's flat, it's scenic, the weather's nice. It was just like that was so easy, and I would totally do all of Florida again.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you have other, the ocean views I assume were incredible, but did you have any good mountain views or anything through like South Carolina, Georgia? You were probably south of the mountains, weren't you?
Yeah. And like day 3 or 4 of North Carolina, the trail took like a hard turn east, and then it pretty much hugged the coast as closely as it could from the North South Carolina border all the way down. There's some parts of Georgia that are coastal that have like the Spanish moss type stuff, like kind of bayou-ish, that were really pretty too.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool that you got to just kind of ride the coast for the most of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you went to Jupiter. How far up from the end is that?
I would say it's maybe like 300 miles, but a couple of years later I went back and started at my grandpa's place in Jupiter and then finished the rest of the trail to Key West, and that took a week, like 7 days.
Dang. Even after all that, you still had a week on top of it. That's wild.
Yeah. The Keys are
That's
great.
really cool. I've been down there once for, I don't know, one of her cousins had a place in Key West in the Keys, and that was really cool. But I was not bougie enough to be one of them. So you got to actually ride that like thin bridge out to the Keys and everything?
Yeah. So as someone who runs, I talked about this with Chris a couple years ago. There is one of those bridges that is straight 7 miles long. It's just a 2-lane bridge. I think they've shot movies there, like True Lies. Like you see those bridges that it looks like there's nothing else but bridge over the ocean. And so there's the 7-mile bridge, like 2/3 of the way down the Keys. And every April they close it down and they have the 7-mile bridge race. And I finally did it a couple years ago. And so like I've never run a marathon. I think I've like the longest I've ever run in one stretch is a half. So 7 miles of running is like that's perfect for me. But I'm sure for people who've run a marathon, it's probably just like a fun training run because they close down the bridge at both sides. There's you start at one and it's just a race over the bridge to the other. But like I don't know, maybe 45 minutes into it, they start a school bus going like 5 miles an hour behind you. And if the bus catches up with you, you've got to get on because they have to reopen this bridge because it's the only link to the rest of the Keys to Florida. So
that's really funny.
Yeah. So I beat the bus. That's what everyone's like, #beat the bus at the end. So that's all I can say for myself.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Oh, man. So in this trip, did you meet anybody? Did you go into any towns and, have a good night with people, or was it pretty much just focused on the ride and you didn't go and party it up with anybody?
No partying. I usually especially with camping, you get right on your circadian rhythm pretty quick. So I wake up with the sun at 6 or 7, and then basically eat something and get going. And then it would get really hot, especially in the southern states, and I'd be tired by 1 or 2. And so I'd hopefully reach the end part of my day in the early afternoon and settle my stuff down. If there is a shower, if there's like a facility shower, and then just like read my phone, or
Yeah.
because I'm like tired, or like walk around the town if it was in the town.
Yeah, so you were getting done. You said early afternoon, so you're
Yeah,
probably 2 o'clock.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if you would just stop for lunch or if you're riding for a full day or not. Uh, did you have to do any night riding at all? Did you have
No,
lights or anything to do that if you needed to?
I didn't. And I realized that like a couple days in, I didn't set myself up for any kind of safe night riding, so I had to keep it during daylight hours.
I've had to do that before where you're riding to class or from class, you're studying late in the library, you're using your phone flashlight to make sure you don't eat shit.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, that's really cool. Is there anything else worth telling about that, or what are you doing with longboarding these days now that you're down in Florida full time?
It's like my weekend thing is I live West Palm Beach is like right on the water, so we have the like road A1A that's just like right on the water. It has a really wide sidewalk, and it has like a really wide lane for people to street park. So it's just like flat asphalt right on the water, and it's, you know, you can crank out a couple miles like out and back, and it's just a great way to spend a weekend morning. The same way I'm sure people do like their morning bike rides or morning jogs. I like to get out on my longboard, and I definitely fell into the thing of like on my trip. I think my deck was from Globe, and it was fine. Like it worked, it served me well. But I realized it was like it's really heavy. It was probably cheaply made. It was built like a tank. And in the times where I had to like pick it up and walk with it, walk up a hill or like walk into a place to use a bathroom or something, like this board is really, really heavy. And so now I have this like kind of bougie board from Pantheon that's it was like it's an expensive deck for sure. It's more than anyone should spend on a skateboard, but it's like whatever. That's where I am
I
now.
have some of those. I
Yeah.
have to. I'll just send you some photos of my boards because there's one that it was the company was BC Ambassador. I don't even know if they exist anymore, but their cool thing was that if you buy their deck, they would
Mhm.
put whatever you wanted, whatever print you wanted onto the bottom side of it.
That's
I
cool.
was like, that's cool. I get a unique board. And for some reason I saw this like panda bear photo of this panda holding two guns. You may have seen it on the internet before. And I sent him that, and I pretty much said like, throw him in a Western barf scene, and that's all I want. And they just like pasted this image over top of this like brutal bar fight going on, and that's what my board was. And
That's awesome.
yeah, I always love that thing. I still have that board. I'll send you a photo of it. Well, cool. The last thing I want to ask you about, because Chris said don't let him leave without telling the story about his double date with Zuckerberg.
Okay. Unrelated to longboarding in every way, but yeah, my first job, my first job out of college, I was just cold applying to a bunch of tech places, and I got into Facebook. So this is 2007 when I graduated college, and I started just in customer service, but worked my way up to the developer platform and being a developer advocate and like talking with Farmville for a job.
Oh my gosh, Mark Bill.
But early on, when it was still really small and still kind of like everyone was in their fifth or sixth year of college, basically, Mark and his now wife, she was roommates with someone else who worked at Facebook, and I guess they had arranged a double date, but this other girl's date bailed or canceled or something at the last minute, and she and I were in the same customer service department, sitting close to each other. She's like, do you want to come?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." I had no idea that Mark Zuckerberg and his girlfriend were going to be there. And if like Farmville wasn't 2007 enough, the date itself was going to see Dane Cook.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
Yeah, and Mark drove, and he was on more 2007, and he was on his BlackBerry the entire time as he drove to the comedy show. And I was like, I swear.
Innovator.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to actually talk with him, or was it just kind of sit down for the comedy show and head home?
pretty much that. And he was like on his phone, he was running a hot startup. So he was like on his BlackBerry for most of the time. But I think there were jokes about oh, do you remember that era of Facebook where it's like you got your friend's a zombie or a vampire and they bit you and now you've got to like bite 5 friends or something? Because there was some
Was that Face? Yeah, I do remember that. For some reason I'm thinking that was MySpace, but I remember that. Yeah,
it may have been
it
on
was like
both.
one of the first mini games or something that came out.
Yeah.
You had to install a separate app, and
Yeah. Yeah. Dane Cook had some bit about that, and that's when like I saw Mark look up like, oh, what?
Oh, so he was still on his phone during the
Yeah.
bits. Oh, that's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah. I'm not painting him in the most flattering light. He's not like the whatever the actor's name portrayed him in that movie. Like he's not completely socially devoid. Like he's a dude, he went to college like the rest of us and he likes to have fun and be social, but yeah,
Right.
I mean, he had more important things to do, I guess.
Oh, I don't blame him. I'm at a small company now, and I met our CEO, and
Mhm.
same deal, just on his phone the whole time.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what's going through his head.
Yeah.
Well, cool, Brian. This was really fun. I'm happy to have heard about this trail and this little adventure that you did, and I'm glad that you're still riding. You're making me want to get out there and get back on a board, but I got to go to a metro park or something.
Well, once the weather gets good, yeah, definitely. And I'll send you a bunch of links. I don't know if you want to put them in like the show description or something, but it was I went into it completely cold, just using this foundation's links. I was able to plan it all for myself pretty easily. So I'm sure anyone else who's interested could do the same.
For biking or longboarding or whatever.
Exactly.
Well, cool. Thanks again, Brian. Definitely send me those links. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Tyler.
Thank you for listening to the High Quality Fun podcast. If you guys enjoyed this show, please give us a follow. And if you have a good story or just want to say hi, feel free to reach out to us on Instagram or YouTube. Thanks for listening.